Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. In today's program, we are very delighted to invite two human rights lawyers to tell us their views about the human rights situation in China. Dr. Matters, we've been talking about international efforts, and the reason why China, surfaced to the international media spotlight is also because of human rights situation in other countries like Darfur. Do you think China is helpful or is damaging in the human rights situation in Darfur?
Well, I would say it's damaging because what it does is it basically supports the Sudanese government. It's a major buyer of the oil that's coming from Sudan, and that money is used to finance the repression of the Darfur people who are trying to exercise their rights to stay where they are. It's financing the Janjaweed who are involved in ethnic cleansing and in the genocide of the Somali people in Darfur. And China is not using the connections it has and the leverage it has with Sudan to try to prevent this genocide. It basically, through its ties with Sudan, and I would say with a lot of other governments, provides a license for repression. I mean, what we have, of course, is a regime which is inflicting massive human rights violations at home, and it's ill-placed. I mean, it's almost hypocritical for it to say to Sudan, respect human rights, when China itself is not respecting human rights. And what you would instead get is a coalition of criminals against humanity and genocidal killers supporting each other.
Yeah. But China has been saying that these are so-called internal issues, internal affairs. No other countries try to get involved and force the government of other countries to do things like that and like this. Do you think that a legitimacy response?
No, but I want to say that I am certainly not agree with the Bush administration on a lot of problems in the world, sure. But what's happened now in Burma with the monk?
That's right.
What's the possibility of China? Enormous. They are now supporting an awful regime. We have to denounce that. It's not only, we don't only denounce the hackers in Europe, the following of the typing of the telephonic harassment in our country. It's a sign. But what we do and what we have done and what perhaps we will do in Burma, it's for me a shame.
Yeah, but the thing is that for many human rights abuses countries, China seems to be behind those countries. Do you think that that's something that the international community has, tend to neglect or ignore over the years?
Well, there has been a focus of Chinese involvement in Darfur, but I think there's been less of a focus of their involvement in Burma or their involvement in Zimbabwe or their involvement in North Korea. And people are not really picking up the pattern. And I mean, I'm happy to see what Steven Spielberg did about Darfur, but the reality is that there are problems with what the Chinese government is doing to its own people that are very grave as well and deserve attention. And it isn't just an external problem, it's also a local problem. But I mean, the international community, they're distracted by politics, they're distracted by economics, they're distracted by propaganda. And I think it falls to us who are in human rights activism or people like yourself in the media to bring people back to the reality of what's going on in China.
But that's the reason why people think that the Summer Olympic Games in August would be a good chance that we can get all the spotlights and all the attention paid to China's human rights situation. And the movie director Steven Spielberg's decision is a very good case in point. Do you think that we still can use that as a mechanism or as a leverage to force China to human rights issues?
This morning one speaker said that in Berlin there were Olympic Games in '36 and that the regime fall in '44. For Moscow it's perhaps the same, 80 and then the falling of Soviet Union in 88. But we will not wait 8 years. No, it's impossible that the world will 8 years after 2008 to see that the corrupt regime.
But do you think that China will get away with this kind of pressure this time, for the Summer Olympic Games?
Well, we have to remember with the Olympic Games, it certainly represents an opportunity to use some leverage and to get some publicity, and we see this with the Olympic human rights torch rallies, and there's a lot of protests that are focused on the Games. But we have to remember that China is using the Olympic Games in exactly the opposite way, as a form of glorification and justification. We have to remember how the Nazis used the Olympic Games, the way Leni Riefenstahl with her film Triumph of the Will, and kind of used this as kind of a way of ensconcing the Nazi regime in power. And we're seeing something similar with the Chinese regime, which is trying to, in a sense, deepen and ensconce itself in power through the Olympic Games. So it's not just a matter of using the Olympic Games for the purpose of promoting human rights. It's also we have to kind of combat the glorification that China is trying to heap upon itself through the abuse of the Olympic Games.
But some people say that after the Summer Olympic Games, we will lose some leverage. And as you mentioned, that China used that as a glorification or justification of its domestic behaviors. So what can we do after the Summer Olympic Games?
But it will happen. We cannot avoid it. So we have to use those events to inform, to denounce, but certainly to continue after. It will be a pity if the human rights organization focus on human rights violation during Augustus and then go away. We have to be there, we have to maintain our attention and our power in the world to say it has to be done. And we have to finish with this regime as soon as possible. It will happen. No, we have to know when. It depends on China, certainly, but it depends also of each of us.
But one pessimistic view is that with the rise of China, the government in China will be more skillful, more capable in controlling its people and in controlling media and so on. Do you think that is a right assessment?
Well, I would say they've not been particularly successful up to now. I mean, if you look at the propaganda that comes out of China, it's very, I mean, it's sophisticated in terms of technology, but it's not very sophisticated in terms of the types of things they're saying. I mean, they tend to gravitate towards the outrageous and avoid the plausible. It's sort of what I would call the big lie. I mean, denying Tiananmen Square and denying organ harvesting, saying it's not happening, and at the same time saying we're stopping it's happening. And the are they going to change to a different type of technique? Hard to say, but to a certain extent, the kind of the big lie technique is embedded in the continuation of a totalitarian regime, because the very existence of such a regime in power is a denial of the needs of human reality, of the will of the people to express themselves. And I don't think that, my own view is that we're not going to see some sort of moderate kinds of progress in China, because I don't think that that kind of transition is possible with that regime. It's sort of, what we've got, if I may use a metaphor, is a democracy and communism on two sides of a big chasm like the Grand Canyon, and you cannot cross that chasm in small steps. I mean, you're either on one side or the other, and I think any attempts at small steps of China somehow becoming more sophisticated, it'll just disappear into the void.
But the point you just mentioned is very important. That is, in order to improve or ensure the human rights situation in China is to have a democracy in China. But do you think that in the immediate future, in the long run, there will be a real democracy in China? Because so far we don't see any real push for democratic reform in China.
I just want to say that I am not against this ideology. I want to have in China a democracy with the right to defend the right of freedom of religious, right of freedom of speech, right of freedom to be real men and women with dignity, no with harassment, no with torture, no with genocide. That's my point of view. The regime, it's not my problem.
But the thing is, without changing the regime, regime type, some people say that there's no way that you can see the real freedom of liberty and human rights and so on. Do you think that's the case?
Well, I think that's true. But I point out that, Taiwan at one time was not democratic, and now it is. Hong Kong isn't completely democratic now, but it's certainly a lot more democratic than mainland China and a lot more democratic than it used to be. So it is perfectly possible. And of course, Taiwan and Hong Kong are the same language, the same culture, the same people. So there's nothing inherently undemocratic in the Chinese culture and traditions. And I think it would be very easy, using the Taiwanese and Hong Kong example, for mainland China to move to democracy, but they can't do it maintaining this regime. I mean, if you look at the Chinese, it's not just a problem with Hu Jintao or Jiang Zemin. If you look at the constitution right now, it's the leadership of the Communist Party, this kind of vanguard of the proletariat. You've got to get away from the notion that these few people that are self-selected are going to run China. The government has to be chosen by the people and not by the group that is in power right now, and then we'll have a democracy.
You talk about the role of Taiwan in this process of China's democracy, and you both are coming here for International Forum on Human Rights in China and the Summer Olympic Games. And you've been talking about the situation in Taiwan and what Taiwan can do for China's human rights situation.
But the only thing that I have to say is we should go to Beijing to have this discuss, to share and to exchange and to criticize. We cannot do that.
Yeah.
But I would say two things about Taiwan. One is, I think Taiwan is very important as an example, because what Taiwan shows is that Chinese people, Chinese culture, Chinese language is perfectly consistent with democracy.
That's right.
And I think that's important. And another fact is the reality is, although even Taiwan has some inhibitions in dealing with China, it has less than most other governments in the world, and it is more overtly willing to say what is true about the mainland China than other governments. And I think that's very important, and that should continue, and that should be accelerated.
The government in Taiwan and people in Taiwan over the past few years have been very proactively in promoting human rights situation in China. When we come back, we'll talk more about the role of Taiwan and what we can do to cooperate with other countries in pushing China to improve the human rights. Don't go away, we'll be right back. Welcome back to Taiwan Outlook. Our guests today are Dr. Matters and Mr. Beauthier. They are both renowned human rights lawyers. We've been talking about the human rights situation in China, but some people say that Taiwan can prove to China that the democracy and the human rights protection can take place in a Chinese society. Do you think that's the right approach to sell to the Chinese people?
Well, I think, as I said before, there isn't just one right approach, but I think Taiwan is strategically located to carry the human rights message to China in a number of different ways. One is the fact that it can serve as an example, but another is the simple fact that there's a lot of communication between Taiwan and China. There's a lot of back and forth, individuals speaking the same language, dealing day to day in business affairs, and carrying the human rights message is not a specialized job of people who are in foreign affairs. It should be the job. I mean, human rights belongs to everybody, belongs to humanity, and everybody should be carrying the human rights message, particularly the Taiwanese when they're dealing with the mainland Chinese, whoever they are, so that the people in mainland China get to know what's going on, that this propaganda blockade gets blocked by the daily human personal contact you get from the Taiwanese going to China, or the Chinese coming over to Taiwan. So, I mean, it's the geographical, the political, the economic proximity, as well as the power of example that I think make Taiwan very strategically placed to promote the human rights message in China.
You both are coming here for International Conference on Human Rights in China and Summer Olympic Games. Do you think that all the guests share the same view that Taiwan should play more actively in pursuing China's human rights situation?
Really, I don't know. I am not a teacher to give good point, bad point. No, what's important, it's in Taiwan and everywhere in the world, there are people who gather to heavy pressure to the government of China, because I repeat, but it's important. It's age to change. It's age to change for people. It's age to change for nature.
Yeah.
We spoke a lot those days about environmental damage. What's happened now in China for people, for the nature? That's my question, not to give good points. We have together to fight, and we will win.
Yeah, but as we said at the very beginning, that looking back, the human rights situation in China actually is deteriorating. So there must be some rethinking about the strategies to improve the human rights situation in China. Do you think that it's about time that we think about different strategies, or do you think that we should continue our original strategies in forcing China?
Well, I think there's at least, no, I think there is some room for rethinking, because one of the things that governments have been doing is engaging in human rights dialogues with China. And those human rights dialogues have not turned out to be very fruitful. That what's happened is that the government of China has sent low-level officials to those dialogues who have nothing to do with human rights, who repeat the prepared scripts year after year saying the same thing, and they really don't amount to much. And what governments have done is they've traded off, in order to have these dialogues, other techniques which they might have used, like resolutions, condemnations, raising matters in international fora. And I think we have to rethink these dialogues, which aren't getting anywhere, really, and thinking of other strategies, at least with governments, to press the human rights agenda with China.
But you said that engagement or dialogue is a very important approach to influence China. And some people say in the old days that to bring China into the world and try to, mold China's behavior. But the result seems to be opposite. In other words, China is changing the world. Everybody is fitting the needs of China. Do you think that kind of engagement policy or dialogue policy doesn't go nowhere?
Well, I would say that the dialogue is useful if it sticks to certain principles. I mean, one is that it should be public. Second is it should be persistent. And a third is it should be high level. And a fourth is that it should be principled. If China's bad behavior influences our behavior, it's only because we let that happen. And we shouldn't be letting that happen. We haven't maintained our principles while engaging in dialogue with China, and we need to do so.
Yeah. Some people say that the Western world are not aggressive enough in forcing those countries, human rights violation countries, to improve its situation. For instance, in Russia, there seems to be concerns about return of Russia to a more authoritarian system, and China's human rights situation deteriorating. Do you think the Western world, especially European countries, have paid enough attention to the human rights situation in Russia, in Central Asia, or even in China?
We have a lot of work around the world, and not from Europe, but from Asia, from Russia too. I think that the fight is not finished. We have to fight against all violation of human rights, and the situation in Russia is certainly not a good situation, but we are focused now on China because they are Olympic Games. We will be focused on Russia if the regime doesn't allow the minority, doesn't allow the freedom of speech, doesn't allow the freedom of organization. You have to know that there are a lot of human organizations who are forbidden in Russia. That's also a point, but we have to fight with only human rights tools, and we have to be perhaps a little bit more to fight. So it can be, for me, important to say to people, come with us.
Do you think that we are getting more support from the international community in general to improve the human rights situation in those countries?
Well, I would say as time goes by and we get the message across that it accumulates. I think we also have to keep in mind that when we're dealing with human rights advocacy, we're dealing with different audiences, at least three different audiences. One is the government of China, and the government of China is impervious to all except coordinated, public, persistent clamor. But we've also got the audience of the victims, because often for victimization, the worst part of it, and I deal with many victims, is the sense of isolation and abandonment. And if we can let them know that we support their causes and we're concerned about their victimization, we help them deal with the victimization. And that can have an impact even if the perpetrator doesn't flinch. And then, of course, there's the audience of the public at large, just getting the message across. I think there's a lot more that we can do to get the message across. And it's not just a matter of getting the message out, but countering the blocking techniques that the Communist Party has developed in its embassies and consulates abroad, and contradicting the propaganda. And I think there's a lot more that we can do about that, and we have to do about that.
Finally, China has been saying, or selling the argument to the outside world that if we have economic modernization, then we can have human rights improvement. In other words, economy comes first. Do you buy that argument?
Yes, because we cannot share, and we cannot have a level of economics. We have, and the European court said in an arrest, in a judgment, what's called Kalashnikov versus Russia, and they said in Strasbourg that it's impossible to avoid this question. You cannot justify violation of human rights for economic reason. It's impossible.
Do you think that's the case?
I would say, in fact, it's the opposite. That what you get with economic development is the development of means to violate human rights in a way that was not possible in a more impoverished society. We could not have seen organ harvesting in China until the development of the technology of organ transplants. And it was the development of the technology of organ transplants that made the killing of innocents for their organs possible. I mean, you could say the same about Nazi Germany, that Nazi Germany could not have engaged in the Holocaust if it wasn't for its ability to ship people through the train lines to Auschwitz and other death camps, its ability to manufacture the poison gas. And so what we see with economic development combined with a totalitarian regime in power is a much more effective and murderous repression than we ever would have had without the economic development.
Finally, some people in China said that we should feed ourselves first before we think about human rights. Do you think that's a good statement?
Well, I believe in economic and social and cultural rights as part of human rights. I wouldn't say that the human rights are just political and civil rights. There is a right to food. Right. There's a right not to starve. And I would say that they're at the same level. I wouldn't say that the right to food is a lesser right than the right to vote. But what you see with an economic regime like China, which is totalitarian, is that it's often economically worse as well as politically worse. Because what you need in order for an economy to function effectively is a free flow of information. And you need the rule of law. You need an end to corruption. I mean, what we have in China is a state clique which runs in a corrupt way for its own benefit. That does not help people get food. It helps the people in power get food, but it doesn't help the people on the street get food. And one can say the same about housing. I mean, look at all the housing that's being destroyed for the Olympics. The Olympics isn't helping the right to housing, and the regime isn't helping the right to housing.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming to our program, and thank you for your endeavors for the human rights in China and all over the world. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for inviting us.
And thank you for watching Taiwan Outlook, and see you next time.